Dr. Imam Omar Suleiman is the founder and president of Yaqeen Institute for Islamic Research, a Dallas-based scholar, civil rights activist, and one of the most prominent Muslim voices in America on faith, justice, and the intersection of religious life and political engagement. Sheikh Omar, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu, and thank you for joining me on this episode of Witness.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you for having me.
What misses the mark about you and other people's understanding, in my opinion, is that behind this larger-than-life stature, you're an incredibly gentle, shy, pious person, someone shaped profoundly by adversity, and someone who is actually highly uncomfortable with praise, celebrity culture, and fame. ChatGPT told me that that was a hagiographic introduction, but is it fair to say?
I hope some of it's true. I mean, I definitely hope that I can be a higher level in terms of piety. But yeah, I'm certainly uncomfortable with a lot of what comes with the public platform. Alhamdulillah, it is what it is, and I definitely am shaped by adversity.
Let's talk about the cause of prisoners. I wanted to start off with that. The cause of prisoners and the oppressed has been central to your work. Why is it central to you? In other words, where does it come from? Not asking for the theological answer, but the personal one.
So there are a few reasons why I think I've cultivated a connection to this particular cause. One of them is, I think, my hatred for abandonment, and no people feel more abandoned than them. It's actually crazy that you can't make the excuse of proximity. For example, even though it's not an excuse, you can say the people of Gaza are very far away. The people in the Muslim world that are getting bombed to pieces are very far away. You can't say that they're not close enough. They're literally right here. You also can't speak about them, and unfortunately we do, like the dead, where you drive by a graveyard and, well, they've already passed away. So I think that there's just something eerie about it all. And I also think that it's the nature of abandonment. It feels incredibly painful to think that we've abandoned these people who have gone to these prisons because of serving their community. And so the community turning its back on those that are imprisoned because they served them is probably why it speaks so deeply to me. There is a whole theological framing to that when it comes to how we're supposed to treat the prisoner and how we're supposed to look out for our prisoners. But that's a huge part of it. I also think that once you know one person who's been imprisoned, like personally, it changes your outlook on everybody else. It's sort of like once you've experienced death, the death of a loved one, then suddenly death feels different. Suddenly the graves feel different once you've put someone you love in those graves.
Let me follow up on that specifically. I
Sure.
know that Aafia's case means a great deal to you. Can you tell me why she matters to you so deeply?
So Dr. Aafia, I've never met Dr. Aafia. I've only seen the videos like so many other people. But I would say that once I met her sister, once I got to know more about her kids, then it started to feel even more personal. So definitely the cause of Dr. Aafia in and of itself is such a noble cause, and just the nature of the injustice towards her. You see, the abandonment is very much so nefariously tied to post 9/11 tactics of intimidation of the Muslim community. The fact that this poor innocent woman, who's very sweet, I mean, the testimonies of her character are consistent, who was doing humanitarian work, charity work, who did everything the right way, I don't believe was guilty of any wrongdoing whatsoever. This isn't even like she did something that was wrong and she was punished more severely. No, I think that this entire case is baseless. I truly do believe that from the bottom of my heart. And you see her sister and you see her kids, like I've had the chance to talk to her family. They just want their mom. They just want their sister back. And at the end of the day, it also pains me more that she's like right here. She's right in Texas and in this huge community of Muslims in the DFW area where, people boast about the Dallas community and talk about how wonderful it is, how great the infrastructure is, how big the masjids are, how many schools we have, and these types of things. That with Dr. Aafia in our backyard, we usually can't get 100 people to go out to a protest for her. That to me is an indictment of the community. So it's not just an indictment of the nefarious political tactics that have been employed against the Muslim community in a post 9/11 world, because who wants to be associated with Al-Qaeda, right? They always frame the prisoner with some sort of stain that if you come near that prisoner, then you too are guilty of the same thing that they've been accused of. And so in a post 9/11 world, who wants to be associated with Al-Qaeda? So Lady Al-Qaeda, I mean, it's so disgusting in its nature. And I think that it also speaks to, in my opinion, the community's idea that if we back off, or if we let this one go and we kind of just stay out of trouble, then hopefully that'll calm things down. And that hasn't worked for over 2 decades. It's not going to work.
Well, let's take the inverse of that for a moment and speak into the framing, the injustice, and the abandonment. I want to talk about Marwan's case, Marwan Maroof, in terms of the larger story around him. My experience was that he became a vessel for accumulated grievance, fear, betrayal, rage, and historical memory. And that changes how communities behave. In his case, we had a number of people come out in support at press conferences and informal gatherings. Expectations, though, mutate. Obviously, you know that well, especially public expectations when there's prolonged injustice. And his case became emotionally enormous for many people, not only because of who he was personally, but because people connected it to this much longer history that you're describing of HLF, 9/11 prosecutions, Palestine violence, all of it. And I think that created a situation where people were carrying expectations that no individual legal case could fully bear. You knew him personally and you know him personally, and you loved and love him personally. I was litigating the case from the inside. What did you learn from watching how the community carried that case?
It kind of fit how people were reacting to Gaza, where when we'd go protest after protest, no one was expecting it to prolong the way that it did. And you could see that a considerable amount of the community sort of faded into the background and was just highly demotivated and hurt. I think we were all hurt, but could not find, unfortunately, the persistence that was necessary to continue the political pressure to try to do what we could. And, this is sort of a faith framing that's very important, that you do your part and you leave the rest to Allah, but you have to make sure that you keep doing your part and leaving the rest to Allah. So the initial reaction to Marwan, it was definitely greater than any other case we'd seen in the community. But I think that the expectation was he's going to come home next week. He's going to come home next month. And so when 1 month became 2 months and 2 months became 3 months, you started to see that same despair sink in that you saw with the looming background. I don't even know if you could ever call Gaza background, right? But the looming tragedy and genocide of Gaza, right? That people kind of despair as it's not changing. Why isn't it changing? Why haven't things gotten better? Why are they still being massacred? Why are they still being starved? So why is Marwan still being held? When's he coming home? And so what it taught me about the community is, I think definitely it took someone so beloved, um, so involved in the community to bring certain people out to his protests. I remember one brother who came to me and said, "This is the first protest I've ever attended." And I was surprised because of who that brother was. And he was like, "I just don't believe in protests." But for Marwan, I couldn't not come out because of who he was, right? Who he is. Yeah, I'm saying it taught me that the community will come out for someone that they love, but it also taught me that we still have a long way to go when it comes to staying the course for a person that is so beloved to our community, and staying the course for other individuals. And that, we can be overwhelmed, unfortunately, to a place of complacency, not acceptance, but complacency. And I think that complacency is what I fear. I think it's exactly what our enemies count on. Not that we become apathetic. I think people still deeply care about Marwan. I think people still deeply care about many of those that get held, but I think they kind of just tap out and just accept that this is the way it's going to be and resign themselves back to their daily lives, while, if anything, just praying for better.
Marwan was and is special. I know you had also hoped for his eventual release. Did you ever expect it?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that I always operate with this hope for the best, expect the worst, and be unsurprised by anything in between. Maya Angelou's motto. I always operate with that. And of course, there's a spiritual framing to that, which is husn al-dhan, and just having a good expectation of God. But I think in the initial days, I did expect that, especially with the political power that we thought we were able to pull that Marwan, who was never guilty of doing anything that should put him in this situation, would just on the basis of that political clout and power be released. Look, at the end of the day, if you were to take Marwan's case, you know this, if you talk about Democrat and Republican support, now some of the Republicans that were supporting were doing so very quietly. Some of the Democrats, candidates, and others were saying, we'll do our part. The community statements, the interfaith statements, the city statements, just all the testimonies to his character. I thought that all of that, from a practical perspective, would culminate in his release. Of course, only Allah is the one who sees and can do on the basis of his divine wisdom, and he sees the whole picture while we only see a pixel. But I did think that at some point in the early part of that case, especially, that would culminate in his release. I would have thought it was like a Salah Sarsour situation, right? So Salah did come out, and may Allah protect him and protect all of those that have gotten out and keep them out.
I think it's important to recognize the differential between how these cases, these ICE pickups are processed, because of course Marwan's basically began and ended in immigration court without the benefit of fully having had a habeas petition heard. And the judge that was assigned to Salah Sarsour's case was an exceptionally strong judge who had issued favorable rulings previously, which speaks to the differential in our judiciary and what it takes when it's so personality driven. You're a well-known admirer of Malcolm X. And I wanted to ask you what it is about him that speaks to you, and who among contemporary or recent world leaders across traditions do you admire in a comparable way?
I think Malcolm was incredibly unique because Malcolm both matched political and religious convictions that I have and I admire so much in him. His sincerity, his willingness to grow, his willingness to challenge and be challenged, the courage to match his convictions, the way that he was able to anticipate things and then take very unpopular positions that turned out to be true, the way that he was always on the side of his people, right? So he never was co-opted. He never became a tool against his people, but he always was a sincere advocate for his people, from his people. So his evolution is purely out of sincerity, not out of political pressure, not out of opportunism. And I think that that's exactly where we should all try to be. And his willingness to make the ultimate sacrifice, which is with his own life. He knew he was going to be martyred. He embraced that fate. He embraced that reality because that's what he believed was true. He had to continue to grow in a way that was going to continue to alienate him, not just from the political arenas that he could have had much mobility and had he relinquished certain positions of his, but even from those that were within his closest circles. He was willing to take stances that would further alienate him because he believed that that was important. He was willing to even take on other causes. Gaza in 1964, Vietnam. He was willing to speak to the most unpopular causes at the time because he believed that it was truth. And so I think that just his orientation in accordance with the truth, that truth was his guide in how he made his decisions, and sincerity was his fuel, and he had courage. And it all came out so beautifully to where even his political opponents at the time could not help but admire who he was, or at least acknowledge his sincerity. Now, was he slandered? Was he ostracized? Was he unfairly treated? Absolutely. But I mean, building on the previous conversation, Malcolm also refused to let his community be taken advantage of by those who spoke to the community under the guise of the lesser of the two evils. I think that you have to have that moral conviction. You have to have that current in your community that says, we're just not going to be taken advantage of anymore. So to me, Zionism is Zionism. Liberal Zionism is evil because Zionism is ethno-supremacy. If you dress it in a way that it comes off as more benevolent by continuing to throw platitudes or talk about some two-state solution, while every prime minister and every administration, every current in this apartheid state is openly and actively moving towards the full erasure of the Palestinian people. That doesn't make me feel better. Like, I'm sorry, that does nothing for me. If you turn this into a Netanyahu problem and you want to bring Yair Lapid in, you're still the problem. So I think Malcolm just loved his people so much that he didn't want them to be taken advantage of. And there were some within the community that were frustrated by that, told him he's being unreasonable and told him that he needs to stop making these types of analogies and stop talking about the liberals that were abusing the Black community in their own ways as well. No, if you speak for your people, you speak for your people. And you have to do so with courage, and you have to do so with conviction. You have to do so with sincerity. And Even if that's going to cost you certain spaces, it's okay.
Do you see someone on today's world stage that embodies those characteristics?
This would sound really bad because it would sound like I'm putting other people down, but I think it's just because I think Malcolm set a standard that I don't know that anyone has reached on the world stage today. I think there are people that will embody certain elements and people that will be admirable. I hesitate sometimes to name because then they'll take a position that's like, oh God, right? So I think let's just leave it at that. Let's say that I don't think anyone has matched Malcolm's purity, not in terms of their intentions. I can't judge people's intentions, but the purity of his approach. And I know that purity tests are used in a way that are not necessarily favorable. But I think even if you look at Malcolm in his last year, did Malcolm reconcile himself to Dr. King's approach? There's a great book by James Cone called Dreams and Nightmare. I think it's important for everyone who is involved in America's complex political mammoth to read. It's called Malcolm and Martin. The late James Cone wrote about their difference of approach. Malcolm was moving closer to Martin. Martin was moving closer to Malcolm. There's no doubt that that was happening. Malcolm, in his last year, spoke favorably about Dr. King. He offered support to Dr. King, but he still disagreed with Dr. King's approach. Like, let's make no mistake about that. Despite his disagreement, he still went to Selma, Alabama. He still wanted himself to be the scary alternative to Dr. King so that Dr. King could get his agenda across. So he said, let me be the person that they'd have to deal with if they don't want to deal with you. So he was willing to be the martyr for Dr. King. You go ahead and you keep moving things in Selma. Let me be that scary alternative because they'd much rather deal with your politics than deal with my politics. I mean, that's incredibly noble. And what you'll notice is that Dr. King reconciled himself to Malcolm's approach. And an honest political historian would say that King between 1965 and 68 sounded a lot more like Malcolm. He took on a lot of Malcolm's burden. It's often positioned as Malcolm was the pessimist, this disagreeable, angry, just destructive voice in the movement that could never see the good, and Dr. King helped him see the light. But it's really quite the opposite. If you look at the positions that Dr. King ended up taking on Vietnam especially, and breaking the silence on that, and how he even spoke about white America, he sounded a lot more like Malcolm after Malcolm was assassinated. And that has to do with why Dr. King would be assassinated at the time that he was as well.
Every answer that you give embeds Gaza. I don't think it's possible to have a conversation with you without that being raised. You didn't go to Gaza. Did you try to go? Did you have an idea that you would simply be denied permission?
I tried to join. There was one doctor's group that eventually was able to get permission for a chaplain type figure. So I tried to join that group of doctors and I was rejected by Kogat. So didn't go well.
Have you seriously considered living in a Muslim majority country permanently?
I don't see myself permanently in any country in the sense that I believe that as American Muslims and as activists, especially and thinkers, it's important to broaden our scope, to broaden our perspective. And so when Malcolm said travel broadens one's scope, I think in this day and age, especially where we're seeing just how destructive American exceptionalism has become, American Muslim exceptionalism also is destructive when we don't think about the world outside of us. And so for me, it's important to spend time in different parts of the world, to connect with people in different parts of the world, to just think about how we move things forward at the global level and not just speak about this cutouts. And I think that that's one of the reasons why we've suffered so much, both as Americans as a whole and as American Muslims specifically, is that we don't think beyond our borders. And so Islamophobia is only deeply a problem when it comes to our local mosques, when we have San Diego type situations, right? That to me is a problem. So when it's our tax dollars that are funding the dropping of bombs on mosques, whether in Gaza or in Afghanistan or in Yemen or wherever it may be, why is that not a problem? I did a video, it was provocative, but it was like, why do Muslims hate America? And obviously we don't hate America, we hate injustice, but that was the point of it. If you search it, it's the question, why do Muslims hate America? It's like, well, let's think about what Muslims actually do hate and why you don't hate that, right? And let's talk about America's foreign policy. And then you can identify the connections between foreign policy and domestic policy. The way that the IDF or the IOF treats Palestinians in the West Bank, those tactics are now being used by police departments here at home. They've been used. It's important for you to recognize the knee on George Floyd's neck as the knee that's been on multiple Palestinian necks in the courtyard of the holy places in Jerusalem and so far beyond. So it's important for Americans to think about the world beyond them, and it's important for American Muslims to think about the world beyond them as well. Connect to the Ummah, connect to humanity, go beyond. So I always see myself as someone that advocates for something far greater than what will touch us within our borders. I want to see a better world. I don't think that Allah has made us simply caretakers of one land, but people that are to be witnesses for humanity. And so that to me is something I think of. And I also view myself as a stranger, as a wayfarer. That's the Prophet, peace be upon him, said, you don't view yourself in this world as being of it. You view yourself as being in it. You are a stranger. You're a wayfarer. And so I try not to get too attached to geography, but instead to mission. So all of that to say, I don't ever see myself forsaking all that we've built, all that we've done here in the United States and in our communities. At the end of the day, I want my 3 kids to know a world beyond the US as well. I want them to know that there's something so much greater than what's within the borders that we live in.
I'd like to spend our last few minutes kind of diving deeper into who you are. To begin with, what is most difficult about the kind of celebrity that comes with your position in this community? Is it hard to give up your privacy?
Very hard to give up privacy. It's very hard to put up boundaries. I struggle with that greatly. I am a very shy person, so I find it extremely difficult to say no. And unfortunately, family pays the price. So I'm trying my best to figure out boundaries. I think that that's something that very few people in the community could probably appreciate, how someone like yourself or anyone that's in a caretaker role, when they wake up in the morning and they open their phone, you're at least reading 20 messages. I need to talk to you right now. I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you. So every morning when I open my eyes, I've got, and it's become 15, 20, 100, 200, 300 messages, because every community I go to and I interact with new people, somehow things get around. And so I have to prioritize which emergency I'm going to tend to every day, which emergencies I'm going to tend to every day. And there is no exception to that. There's not a single day that we're not putting out some sort of fires, right? And so that's everything from another domestic violence case to someone whose kid wants to commit suicide, to community scandals and tragedies, to someone else being picked up by ICE. Every day it's,
Let me
yeah,
ask you this, because I know that we've spoken about the infrastructure question, and you've
yeah.
raised it with me about the community owes our leaders mental health services, pastoral care. Are the youth programs and marriage counseling just not enough? And if you could build one thing tomorrow that doesn't currently exist to help
Mm,
this community, what would it be?
caseworkers. We need more caseworkers. We need caseworkers for refugees. We need caseworkers for our homeless populations. We need people to follow up with those that have these emergency situations within their families. There's a lot of hand holding. At the end of the day, our programs and our classes speak to theory that seems to fall apart once someone is already in crisis, and we just don't have crisis management infrastructure in our community. And then everything ends up getting dumped on those that are the most visible representations of the community leadership to the community. And so the imams have the greatest trust from the community. So it all comes back to them. And sometimes I can funnel and I can send them to certain organizations. Sometimes those organizations don't exist. But even the referencing, the initial conversation and referencing people to where they need to go becomes very overwhelming, because I can't talk to 400, 500 people in a single day. I just can't. Right. So, and I'm not just saying this because I'm quote unquote a celebrity imam. I'm saying this at the end of the day, I choose to be a volunteer imam in my community. I'm a volunteer at Valley Ranch. I'm not, in any way employed, but I want to be amongst a community, my community, and people are looking for anyone that can help them in their time of need. They're so desperate that they will simply knock on the door of a person whose door they know. And we need the ability to be able to have the inbound and the continuation for people of different needs. And I can't even begin to express how bad it is right now. It's extremely bad right now. Family counseling, refugee needs, the Gaza families that exist in our cities, the ICE detainees, their families. It's just a whole lot right now.
One of
Um,
your gifts to our community is your educational series. I appreciated your Ramadan series and your beautiful dua. I wanted to ask you what the inspiration behind those dua is. It's not ChatGPT making dua, right?
no, it's not ChatGPT.
And in your privacy and solitude, do you make dua in Arabic or in English?
Both.
Okay. What was the inspiration behind the Ramadan series this year?
So believe it or not, the dua part was actually not initially part of the plan. It was something that just kind of got tacked on at the very end. And it was like, let's just make dua with these names of Allah and see how it goes. So it was like, let me just think about how I would make dua with each of these names. Some of them were personal duas that pre-exist, that 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 already existed before the Ramadan series, excuse me. So they were pre-existing du'as that were brought into the Ramadan series. But ultimately, I think it's important for people to know that you can call upon Allah in your language using his names, that he is accessible to each and every single one of us, that you don't have to be poetic, that you don't have to rhyme, that it doesn't have to be in a particular language, but you need to learn how to talk to Allah. Just talk to Allah. And that will cause you to find a sweetness in your dua that will serve as a launch pad to future du'as and words that otherwise you would not have been able to find.
I appreciate that. And I want to ask you about another aspect of who you are that is known commonly to be a big part of who you are. And that, of course, is your mom. I think anyone who has heard you knows how much reverence you have for her. And we all kind of feel like we know her battles with illness, her partial deafness that protected her. I loved the story of how she didn't understand the exact nature of what was being gossiped about, her coverage of the Quran during Ramadan. And so we know that she's your greatest human motivator and that the loss of her has shaped you profoundly. From my perspective, it seems it would be a foregone conclusion that there's a sadness your children did not meet her. What are the stories about her that you tell your kids?
I find myself telling my kids about her pretty much every day. Um, so anything that allows me to introduce another dimension of her to them, I do. So we'll talk about just her funny moments. We'll talk about jokes that she used to make. We'll talk about her perseverance. And I try to make sure that they see her as someone who's deeply present in their lives and present in their current struggles and present in shaping their current perspectives on life. And the benefit of that is that when my kids will go through, at least the older ones, when they'll go through tribulation, they'll remember her tribulation, they'll remember her struggle. It'll actually come from them now, as if she sat them down at a breakfast table and spoke to them about how she got through some adversity in her life. And so I'm starting to see that now, especially with my older two, and especially with my oldest, in fact. And that to me means the world. So at the end of the day, like, it's one thing is visiting her grave and having conversations about who she was. The other thing is, alhamdulillah, 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 my father being here to tell other stories and speak about her over lunch like we did yesterday and talk about some things that we didn't know before, some conversations or debates or some of the inner struggles. Um, all of that just helps shape perspective. I love biography in general. I love biography. I teach biography. It's my favorite genre to read the biographies of heroes and villains, people that are way in the past and people that are still very much so present. And at the end of the day, it helps us tap into our own humanity and the best version of ourselves and also avoid the worst version of ourselves. So when you're talking to your kids about their grandma who they've never met, and they say it feels like we've met her, it feels like we've known her, we can't wait to meet her, then that's something that's extremely important to me, convey and to continue with them.
Thank you for answering that. A question for you to close us out with, and that is if you could say one thing to the Muslim Americans who may be listening to this, not a platitude, but something true and specific in this moment, what would it be? And can you center it around the thing that gives you genuine, non performative hope?
I would say your political prisoners and your refugees. If you gain closeness to your political prisoners and advocate for them, the freedom of a single political prisoner feels like breaking the shackles off of an entire people. And if you deeply connect yourself to the refugees in your midst, then you'll have such a closer connection to the places that they came from that you claim to care about. It's easy for us to speak about persecution over there. It's much more difficult to deal with the persecution that is right in your backyard. And so I would say if you could dedicate yourself to those two causes, then do so. And the hope is that, look, we have won quite a few battles that seemed impossible. It's really interesting because, like, you asked about, Marwan, and this is Allah's qadar, Allah's divine decree at the end of the day. And I'm sure that Allah has a plan for Marwan that is far greater than had he been released here in the United States once again. I'm 100% sure of that. I have zero doubt in that, full certainty in that. But like, if you would have asked me between Marwan and some of those that did get out, right, who I thought would have gotten out, it went the other way. But at the end of the day, alhamdulillah ala kulli hal, all praise is due to Allah in every situation, every circumstance. There's a wisdom in it all. But just really focus on the things that are closest to you, because the deeper you get into those causes, the more that it's going to inform and shape the way that you dedicate yourself to global causes that can otherwise feel distant.
I want to thank you. To say that you're a special person is one thing, but I ask Allah deem you special in His sight, to elevate you for the work that you do. I also want to thank you for bearing witness on this episode. As you know, the goal behind this is for us to document our stories. It's people of conscience and courage who have collided against systems of power. We are inextricably intertwined in that narrative. And so, again, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all that you've done to fight for our prisoners and everything else that you've done for the community. We really appreciate it as a whole, and I pray that Allah rewards you and all of those that don't get enough credit for the sustained work behind the scenes.
Jazakallah. Take care. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam.